welcome. In today's episode, I'm going to share encounters with Dogman. These stories include an encounter in Mexico with a creature known as a Nahual, a man who shares an encounter he had with his son, and the story of a local legend in the United Kingdom known as the Beast of Barmston Drain. But first, we start with a story coming out of Kansas where one user shared an encounter with a strange creature lurking around their property.
Before we get started, I just want to say that a lot of people turn to posting their stories online because they feel like they can't tell anyone and would be seen as crazy if they did. Most people who experience these beings are traumatized and feel the need to unburden themselves, or just have someone who will believe them listen to their story. If you've had an encounter and you feel like you can't tell anyone for fear of being made fun of, ridiculed, called a liar, or any other reason, email me. You'll find a sympathetic ear here who will believe you. I do want to mention that just because you email me your story, it doesn't mean it will end up in an episode on my channel. Your story can stay between me and you if that's what you want. Also, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to come on an episode and tell your story, email me. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. Alright, let's get into today's stories.
The first story of this episode comes to us from a poster who had a strange creature lurking around her property. She resided in central Kansas at the time. Her home was near a reservation and on a farm established in 1858. After relocating there roughly 2 weeks prior to posting her story online, she observed something that seemed to be stalking the farm. Initially, she assumed it was coyotes or feral dogs, and took necessary precautions, given the presence of livestock guardian dogs that fulfilled their roles effectively. However, that night she and her boyfriend encountered something that didn't resemble any known wildlife. The first sighting took place around 9 p.m. at a distance of approximately 25 to 40 feet. The creature had grayish fur and traversed half an acre to an acre in mere seconds. She raised a BB gun to scare it away from her chickens, mistakenly believing it was a coyote, with no intention of causing it harm. However, it was massive, and by the time it reached the tree line and glanced back at her with forward-facing eyes, it stood at a height of 7 to 10 feet tall. About an hour and a half later, she and her boyfriend were outside again and saw the creature much closer, just across the road, around 75 feet away. It still appeared to be 7 to 10 feet tall, walking bipedally and snapping full-sized tree branches. The creature transitioned from being at dog level to towering above them while in a creek bed. Additionally, she mentioned hearing voices outside that were neither human nor animal. She posted her story online seeking ideas, suggestions, and stories to help determine the next steps for dealing with the situation. I think the last thing I'd want to see lurking around my property would be a 7 to 10 foot tall creature, much less a dogman. If there's one consistency with dogman stories, it's that they emanate pure evil and possess a pure hatred for humans. It's one thing to see them out in the middle of nowhere, but to have one near your home would be absolutely terrifying. I don't blame her for seeking guidance on how to deal with this. Unfortunately, I don't have any concrete solutions on how to get rid of this creature. I don't think anyone would, as our knowledge of cryptids is very limited. I will say that the best thing they can do is not interact with the creature in any way. This usually just draws their attention and/or provokes them. As for the voices she heard, she says aren't human nor animal. That might be something else entirely and sounds paranormal to me. She may want to have her property blessed and give up any activities that may directly or indirectly be attracting this kind of activity around her home. What do you think about this story? Any ideas on how to get rid of a dogman? The next story comes from a poster who shares an encounter his classmate's brother had with a noal. The noal is a cryptid known in Mexico that is similar to a dogman. The story was shared by his classmate while they were on a class field trip to Yucatan, Mexico. While on their trip, most of the group opted to camp instead of staying at the hotel. One night, while they were discussing paranormal topics, his classmate shared a story about his brother encountering a noal. a sorcerer believed to transform into an animal like a dog. He advised them to take the story with a grain of salt, as both his brother and his brother's girlfriend were heavy marijuana users. His brother, who at the time lived with his girlfriend in a house in a wealthy area, owned a dog. Behind this area was a green zone where they often walked the dog. One day, while there with his girlfriend, she heard a sound in the bushes. He claimed to have seen 3 pairs of ears above the bushes, prompting them to leave quickly. Additionally, there was a cave that the classmate, his brother, saw and insisted was a lair dug up by something. On another occasion, the brother and his girlfriend were near that spot again and reported a foul smell of rotten flesh and sounds resembling an animal being killed, which again made them leave very quickly. The final incident occurred at night when the brother and the dog were in the green zone. As they were heading back home, the dog froze, staring in one direction. The brother looked the same way and saw it, something extremely thin, as if its skin was stuck to its bones, with a cat-like tail rather than one like a dog. When it looked at them, it looked like, according to his description, an ugly, hairless, dog-like creature. It stared at them briefly before retreating into the bushes, causing the dog to go berserk on its leash, desperately wanting to go home. The classmate mentioned the lair again because sometime before that, he and his brother had gone to watch a movie, and afterward, they drove to that green area to smoke marijuana. His brother casually remarked that this was the place where all the encounters had occurred. I've covered Dogman stories from all over the world, and as I start to see more and more encounters being shared, I've started seeing more about the noal. In Mexican folklore, a noal is a witch or sorcerer who can transform into different animals, especially a jaguar or a black dog. It's believed that they use their abilities for evil purposes. Now, I know this sounds more like a skinwalker than a dogman, but based on how he described the creature in the story, I would lean toward this thing being a dogman. Whatever this thing really was, though, it had to be terrifying to not only see it, but know that it's lurking around out there so close to where they live. If it were me, I wouldn't go out after dark unless I absolutely had to, especially when it came to walking my dog. What do you think about this one? What would you do if something like that was lurking around the area where you live? The next story comes from Nashville, Indiana, where one man had a terrifying encounter while out with his son and their dog. He and his son used to go on trail runs together when his son was training for military tests. One late fall evening, they decided to hit the trail. Equipped with their modest headlamps and their trusty dog, they set off. Living at the end of a long gravel driveway, the early nightfall during autumn was especially noticeable after a full day at work. Both wearing earbuds, each absorbed in their own motivational tunes, they began their run down the driveway. Path stretched nearly a mile depending on the route. About an eighth of a mile into their warm-up jog, his son tapped him on the shoulder, prompting him to stop. Removing an earbud, he asked what was wrong. His son gestured behind them, revealing that their dog had come to a halt. Turning around, they saw her intently staring into the woods beside the driveway. Sharing a look of concern, they made their way back to her. When they reached her, she stood completely still, her hackles raised. As his son tried to pet her, she jumped as if she had been touched by a hot iron. She whined, licked her lips, and shifted her weight nervously. For context, the original poster says she is a fearless mix of boxer and beagle and has never shown fear before that moment. Additionally, they had recently expanded a pond on their property, leaving large piles of dead trees. When he and his son switched their lights to high, they were met with a deep growl. It was the kind of growl that resonated like a thud of a bass drum, according to the original poster, making one's hair stand on end. It was too much for their dog, who whined and retreated to the house. As they increased the intensity of their lights, they could make out a shadowy figure with pointy ears and broad shoulders. What remained ingrained in his memory, he says, were the eyes that were a burnt orangish red. Once seen, they were impossible for him to forget. He says no land-based animal with naturally fluorescent eyes was known to him, yet there they were, staring back. The figure slowly receded into the underbrush, leaving them bewildered by the encounter. The absolute last thing I would want to see while looking into the dark forest would be glowing orangish red eyes looking back at me. Not to mention hearing whatever was behind those eyes growling like it did during this encounter. I believe I would have been right behind the dog as it took off back to the house. One thing that makes me definitely think this was a dogman was him describing the pointy ears, but more so than that, the broad shoulders. Dogmen are said to be very physically fit, with bodies that resemble bodybuilders. That's the impression I got when he described this thing's shoulders. He and his son were extremely lucky with this thing just backing into the underbrush and retreating, and I'm glad it did, because this encounter could have gone very wrong if it didn't. What do you think about this story? And what would you do if you looked into the dark forest to see that looking back at you? The final story of this episode comes to us from the United Kingdom and has to do with a local legend known as the Beast of Barmston Drain, otherwise known as Old Stinker. The sightings detailed in this story take place in the Hull. This area has experienced a wave of werewolf sightings, prompting questions about the residents' well-being. 7 individuals reported spotting an 8-foot-tall creature in a deserted industrial area. The legend of Old Stinker had long been a topic of local folklore in the Yorkshire wolds. Folklore enthusiasts and residents were worried that Old Stinker might have shifted his territory, but the recent sightings in the area have put those doubts to rest. The initial sighting occurred shortly before Christmas near Barmston Drain, a water channel created in 1798 to drain salt marshes. One woman recounted observing the transformation from man to beast while trembling on a bridge above. He shared with the Express, a local newspaper, one moment it stood upright, the next it was down on all fours running like a dog. I was terrified. It bounded along on all fours, then stopped and reared up on its hind legs before running down the embankment towards the water. It vaulted 30 feet to the other side and disappeared up the embankment and over a wall into some allotments. Following sighting was by a couple who claimed it leaped over an 8-foot fence when they stopped to get a better look at it. Another woman, while walking her dog along the watercourse, spotted a, quote, half-man, half-dog figure in the distance. As this might be the most exciting event to ever happen in the Hull, the locals planned a werewolf hunt the next full moon. However, no updates were given on the supposed hunt. Charles Christian, the author of A Travel Guide to Yorkshire's Weird Wolds, mentioned to the Express that werewolf sightings in the area date back centuries. He explained the Yorkshire Wolds was actually one of the last parts of England to have wild wolves. Old Stinker was said to be operating on the other side of them, but it would be no distance at all for a large animal to get to the Hull. He said, quote, I am happy to keep a diary of sightings by people around here and report them to the Hull Council. When you get multiple sightings combined with tradition of stories going back centuries, it is hard to ignore the possibility something might be there. End quote. Mike Covell, a supernatural expert, shared his thoughts as well. He said, quote, I was skeptical at first, but then more and more people contacting me saying they had seen the same thing. No one really knows what to do. You can hardly pop down to the local council office or police station and say you'd like to report a werewolf. End quote. Another user from Yorkshire commented on the post, thrilled the original poster brought up the Beast of Barmston Drain, saying that it's exciting because it's so close to home, and they have several high-profile, quote, werewolves or dogmen accounts in the northern United Kingdom. Although they are sometimes overshadowed by the prominent US cases, which the original poster says are awesome. Paul Sinclair, a researcher who has studied Old Stinker and other werewolf/dogman sightings in the UK, has extensive knowledge about such encounters, especially in Yorkshire, his home region. He creates a series of compelling videos on his YouTube channel where he retraces these mysterious sightings and provides detailed accounts of the locations. Sinclair had investigated numerous reports around Stakston Wold, where some locals believed the werewolf spotted in the area was Old Stinker, known to travel along the inland watercourses. A local farmer had reportedly seen this creature multiple times over the years and even claimed to have shot at it. A centuries old stately manor stood somewhere in the region, with rumors suggesting the aristocratic residents knew of the beast lurking in their forests. In Yorkshire, in an area known as Barguest, there was a sighting reported about a year before the posting in a country park on the outskirts of Leeds. I love hearing about local legends, so when I came across the Beast of Barmston Drain, I knew I had to include it in an episode. Sightings of this particular dogman go back decades, with people from all over seeing the creature. Repeated sightings from a lot of different people can't be ignored, as the local newspaper even picked up the story. It just adds credence and legitimacy to the stories for me. This one reminds me of the Beast of Bray Road here in the United States and is equally fascinating. Even researchers, authors, and supernatural experts agree that there is more to this than being just an urban legend. What do you think about this one? Do you think the Beast of Barmston Drain is just an urban legend, or is there more to it?
And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put my email in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use your story in an episode. Even if you'd prefer I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. Also, if you'd like to come on an episode and tell your own story, email me. Please remember to keep it civil in the comment section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.